Senator Patterson. Senator Patterson, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions about a conference taking place in Melbourne next week called the Post-Pandemic China-Australia Economic Cooperation Forum. Any officials who are familiar with that could come forward.
Sorry, Senator, could you just repeat that? We just had a bit of a background noise. Sorry.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sorry.
It's called the Post-Pandemic China-Australia Economic Cooperation Forum. It's being sponsored by the China Chamber of Commerce in Australia, and it's to be held in Melbourne next week.
Senator, I don't think we know anything about that conference, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So you wouldn't be able to tell me whether there are any DFAT officials attending the event?
Senator, no.
There was an archived version of the program online, which is no longer online, which said that a senior representative from DFAT was attending. Now, that may not be the case. This group may just be claiming that someone from DFAT was attending.
We're not aware of anyone attending from DFAT, Senator.
Okay. There has been a little bit of media coverage about this event, which I'll come to in a minute. But for your background, one of the sponsors for this event is the China Institute for Innovation and Development Strategy. This is a group which, in Alec Joski's book Spies and Lies, he says there's very strong links between the Ministry of State Security, China's principal foreign intelligence agency, and this body. Mr Joski didn't have the benefit of parliamentary privilege when he wrote his book, so I can go a step further and say it's a front group for the MSS, very clearly. It's founded by Zheng Bajan, whose, apologies for pronunciation, who coined the term China's Peaceful Rise, which we now understand to be a Ministry of State Security influence operation. He's the former Executive Vice President of the Central Party School of the Chinese Communist Party. So just taking into account you're not familiar with the event.
Excuse me, Chair,
yes,
if I may. Sorry, Senator Patterson, can I just clarify, do you have a copy of the conference? Is that something that we could just have a look at?
I do have some papers. I'm happy to table them, but I'm not sure the Chair would want me to table all of them. It might be better that I provide it to the department.
So it's not just the agenda you've got in front of you there?
Okay. It might be better if I provide it to the department after this,
sure,
so they can consider the information in it and what they wish to do with it. So just proceeding, the forum is sponsored by this group, which is an MSS front group. It will be addressed by Mr Feng Wei, who's the Vice Chairman of the group. As a matter of principle, is it appropriate for a Ministry of State Security front group to be involved in organising a conference in Australia?
Senator, any questions relating to intelligence engagement should be addressed to relevant agencies, Department of Foreign Affairs.
Yes, I can and will pursue it with them in other forums, but it has been suggested to me that DFAT is attending and speaking at the event. One of the diamond sponsors for the event is China Construction Oceania, which is a fully owned subsidiary of the China State Construction Engineering Corporation. That company may or may not be familiar to officials because it was blocked from acquiring the Australian construction company ProBuild on national security grounds. Again, as a matter of principle, is it appropriate for a company blocked by FIRB for the national security risks from acquiring an Australian company to sponsor a forum held in Australia?
Senator, if I may, I think there's very different tests that would apply to those different circumstances. Companies of all sorts from various countries may be not have foreign investment approvals granted for various reasons. I don't think it's not a probity test of any sort.
It was on national security grounds.
Well, that entity is a Chinese SOE. We of course know who you're referring to. MSS is part of the Chinese government, part of the Chinese state. We do have, it's part of the Chinese government with whom we have, of course, diplomatic and other relationships. But in terms of appropriateness to sponsor a conference that isn't a DFAT conference and doesn't have DFAT participation in it, I really don't have any comment.
I'd just be grateful if you took on notice the DFAT participation, since you weren't aware of it, in case there is someone from DFAT who was planning to attend.
Certainly.
Are you aware of there's been some media reports in the Herald Sun that the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews will be speaking at this event?
No.
Did the Premier consult DFAT about whether or not it would be appropriate for him to speak at this event?
Not to my knowledge.
Is it normally the sort of thing that you would hope or expect a state Premier or state government would seek DFAT's advice on?
Oh, I think in Australian, in his own jurisdiction, no, I wouldn't expect that, to be honest. If it were in China or overseas, it might be a different matter.
The Victorian government clearly doesn't have expertise in foreign influence or foreign interference. As has been well demonstrated on a number of occasions, wouldn't it be prudent for the Premier to seek advice before speaking at a conference co-sponsored by a front group of an intelligence agency?
Obviously, I'm not going to speak for the Premier or about decisions that they take, apart from saying that actually we do have very serious and consistent discussions with state governments about matters of foreign interference, foreign influence, are two different things. We have, of course, as you are extremely well aware, legislative agreements, legislative provisions to safeguard our security in that regard. So we have serious discussions and engagements on the issues in general, but doesn't mean that it's every particular event that might happen across the country.
Could you just take on notice if there was any contact between the Victorian Government and DFAT in relation to this event, whether it's related to the Premier attending and speaking at the event or just more generally about this event being held, and provide that on notice, please? I mean, this is not just a United Front group. This is a MSS-sponsored group. It appears that the main purpose of CIDS, the China Institute for Innovation and Development Strategy, is elite cultivation and recruitment. And just to give some examples, one of its senior advisors is Lynn Dee, who's a former bureau chief of the MSS in the United States, who led the United States operations on behalf of the MSS. It appears, pretty transparent what it is, and all of this is just from open source information, I stress. None of this is sourced from classified intelligence. Do we need to have a more robust process in place for assessing potential events like this if state governments of Victoria or elsewhere are just unwittingly wandering into participating in them and giving them credence?
Oh, I think I'll go back to the sort of basic point that was made earlier about other agencies, other national security agencies, also having, prime role in matters that might be foreign interference in that damaging sense.
Okay. Well, I'll provide the information that I have direct to the department, and I encourage you to consider whether DFAT has had any involvement in this, and if you could advise me about that, I'd be grateful. I'll just move on to another matter, Chair.